talk about the important topic of preparing for animals in a disaster, because it's a topic near and dear to my heart. I am part of the Virginia State Animal Response Team as an ex officio member, as a function of my job as state public health veterinarian, but I also volunteer with the National Veterinary Response Team, and I think it's a really important topic because I think we know, or we've seen over time, that preparing for animals is preparing for people. They're not disconnected. It's we should take a holistic approach to preparation. So as we talk about preparing for the family, as we talk about preparing for people, we should talk about preparing for the whole family. And that in many instances includes pets. Or it may include livestock and horses. I'll talk about that a little bit too, about some of the preparations that folks with larger animals can consider and may want to think about implementing to prepare for disaster. So certain formal studies have documented that household evacuation failure tends to increase in households with pets. And also another important phenomenon that's been documented is that premature re-entry into an area that has been evacuated tends to be higher for pet owners. Pardon me, that last bullet is incomplete, and I apologize. If they have not taken their pet with them or made preparations for their pet. So a couple of things there. One, people tend to not want to leave if they don't have a plan. If they don't have materials at the ready that they can take with them, if they don't have a plan to leave and where to go, when they have pets, they tend to stay. Also, too, if people decide to leave and leave their pets, they tend to want to get back into an area before first responders have told them it was safe. So either way, what you have with both of those phenomena is people taking risks on their own lives because of their pets. So it's bad for the pets, it's bad for the people, and it also then tends to, in what is otherwise typically a very hectic, difficult, and stressful situation for first responders, it may tend to put first responders in a space where they are now responding to difficulties and human health concerns or human injuries where they wouldn't necessarily have had to if those folks had been able to evacuate, take their pets, have the equipment they needed, and have a safe place to go. So all the way around, any way you kind of look at it, it's better for the people, it's better for the pets, it's better for those trying to help respond to the disaster if folks can be prepared, especially if they can be prepared to take their pets with them if they need to evacuate. Just to point out there, that picture is a row of houses in the Far Rockaway area of New York in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. I took that picture as part of I was deployed there for National Veterinary Response Team. And just brownie points, you get nothing but the glory. I can't guarantee any money, but you get brownie points if anybody puts into the chat or can shout out at the end of the presentation what it's my understanding is the nickname for Far Rockaway. So if anybody knows Far Rockaway's nickname, put it in the chat, and you will have my undying devotion. That's all I can promise you. So now let's talk a little bit about preparedness planning and what that looks like, and some of the statistics we have about preparedness planning. There was a study done by the ASPCA not long ago there as far as preparedness planning. Their survey would indicate that lots of current pet owners report living in a community threatened by a natural disaster. That could be lots of different things, whether it's tornado, hurricane. And to be fair, for the purposes of this conversation, I'm kind of focused on natural disasters. I know there can be other kinds, there can be disease outbreaks and such like that, but for the purposes of this talk, I thought I'd focus on natural disasters. So a lot of people who own pets currently report living in a community potentially threatened by a natural disaster, and lots of pet owners said they would evacuate with their pet, which is great, but less than half of them have a plan. Less than half of them have a plan to do so. So if you don't have a plan, then your hope of evacuating with your pet may be in jeopardy. And so we know that more than 1 in 5 pet owners have evacuated their homes due to a disaster or emergency, and nearly half left at least one pet behind. All right, so that was other findings of this survey. 32% of pet owners say they left behind at least one dog, 20% left behind at least one cat, and 8% left behind horses. Of those who left a pet behind, nearly 30% cited not having enough time when disaster struck, further emphasizing the need to prepare for emergencies in advance. And 40% of pet-owning evacuees did not return to their homes for at least 4 days, and in some cases up to 2 weeks. Again, that concern about evacuating without having a plan and leaving your pet and trying to return or not being able to return for many days or even weeks, which means that that pet's health is now in jeopardy, especially if you haven't been able to at least prepare to have that pet shelter in place with enough food, water, supplies, etc. And 84% of pet owners do not have emergency pet-friendly housing secured. So all of these things underscore the importance of planning for pets ahead of disasters, whether that's flooding, winter storms, tornadoes, wildfires. And I've put the link in case you'd like to read the full survey or review the ASPCA's disaster site. I've put the link for that specific survey in the bottom there. I'll also have a number of resources from various groups at the very end. So I've captured those for those who may want to view those and review their emergency plans. One thing that is helpful is to generally know what kind of disasters are likely to happen in your area. Is it a flood-prone area? Do you live on the coast where hurricanes may be an issue? I mentioned earthquakes. We don't think about earthquakes much here in Virginia, but recently, in fact, just on the news this morning, I was hearing about some of the concerns that folks in South Carolina have been having with multiple low-level earthquakes. Also know what kind of disasters could happen on your property, such as barn fires or a power outage. All of these things help you to have good situational awareness. It may also help give you an idea of the amount of time you may have to react. So just good situational awareness there about what kind of disasters are likely to happen in your area or perhaps happen on your property. One big and important preparedness tip for animals in general. It could be big or small. These are you'll see some of these concepts mirrored when I talk about large animals. This is probably a bit more particular to small animals, companion animals like dogs and cats, but I think some of these things very much could apply to larger animals as well. Keeping a pet emergency kit, or what I like to think of as a go bag, at the ready, and have an ability to assemble it quickly. So I realize a go bag could be anything from a backpack. It could be a large plastic Ziploc bag. In fact, the Virginia State Animal Response Team, and I hope to have some of these next, when we have our the EP&R fair coming up here later this month, we have large plastic Ziploc bags with a checklist on the front of it. It could be something as simple as that, but a bag or a way and a checklist and a way to assemble those things quickly if you're going to have to evacuate. Keeping in mind all of your pet's needs and keeping in mind the needs of perhaps the facility where you may be evacuating to and what their requirements might be. So things like certainly medications, if your pet's on any medication, vaccination records. You may even want to, if your pet has a complicated medical history, have a copy of your pet's medical records, or at least a summary of what is happening with your pet. You want to have a leash, you want to have a collar. You certainly want to have identification, whether that's a collar with an ID tag, a microchip. I would suggest both in case your pet gets loose. It's a good idea to have those anyway, whether there's a disaster or not if your pet gets loose. Water, food, bedding, toys, towels, a pet carrier or kennel that is labeled with your name, your pet's name, and certainly important phone numbers and addresses. So if you're evacuating and you are going to be, if your expectation is, or you've prearranged to spend your evacuation time with friends, family, or are maybe you have a list of phone numbers and addresses of pet-friendly motels and hotels that you have communicated with prior to the disaster. Have all of those with you so you have them at the ready. And again, I certainly understand that people may not be able to have these go bags already set and ready to go. But if you think about what you're going to need and how much room, how big of a bag or what you're going to need to haul those materials in, and have that list at the ready, it's really going to improve your response time and your ability to get all of those things together and your pet or pets in the car and out the door. And like I said, having an awareness of the disasters that are likely to happen in your area may also help you understand what your response time is going to need to be. Perhaps you're in an area that's prone to hurricanes, or where it's not unusual that hurricanes happen. Well, hurricanes are something that typically don't come up suddenly overnight, and you can plan and prepare for them with maybe a few days' notice if you think you might need to evacuate. If you're in an area that's perhaps prone to, or where wildfires have been a problem in the past, that may look a little different as far as response time, because you may have to be ready to respond more quickly and be told to evacuate more quickly in a wildfire situation, for instance, than say in a hurricane. So having that situational awareness of what kinds of disasters are likely to happen in your area, or what the history of those has been, you can gauge a bit about what your response time is going to need to be. And that way, if you need to contact anyone else to gather information like medical records, vaccination records, you'll be able to gauge how much time you're likely going to have to assemble all of these things. Oops. Hang on. Sorry, my slides don't seem to be advancing. Hang on just a second. Let me try. Let me try that. There you go. So you want to think about what you want to bring, how you're going to get all that together, and then of course you're also going to need to think about where. So there's the what you need, how you're going to get there, and the where you're going to go. So you obviously all of this discussion and this whole month is a focus on preparedness and planning ahead. So you want to plan ahead, make some phone calls to determine options for pet placement and care if you have to evacuate, and maybe even do that a good bit ahead. Maybe know whether there's even in peacetime, as they say, way before any disaster might occur, maybe you would want to contact hotels and motels in your area, and maybe some in the further reaching surrounding areas, to find out which ones are pet friendly, which ones might, and what if any restrictions there might be to pets in a hotel or motel. Always remembering too that it's good to have a backup plan to where you're going to go, because if you plan to evacuate within your area or close to it, remember, of course, that the disaster may also be affecting that facility as well. So you may want to think about having a backup plan to where you're going to go, both within your area, but also maybe further afield from your area, taking into account that if your area is affected, the place where you plan to evacuate may not be available to you. So you want to think about facilities like boarding kennels. You may want to check with your veterinarian or other veterinary hospitals in the area to see if they have boarding facilities or would be able to keep a pet in an emergency. Certainly friends or relatives who live perhaps a little farther away from the area where your neighborhood, your community is likely going to be affected would be a good thing to see if you could connect with them and evacuate there. And then if you need to, and you feel like there's no way you can evacuate with your pet, and you feel you're going to need to leave your pet at home, which I would say is not preferred, but you'd at least want to assess your home, survey your home to determine the best location, the safest location you can find for your pet. For instance, an area away from windows, like a utility room, maybe a bathroom, tiled areas that perhaps could be cleaned easily, and where you think your pet is likely to be safest if you are going to be in a situation where essentially you're going to be having your pet shelter in place. There are also government shelters that open up in Virginia. When a state of emergency is declared, there are areas that will shelter pets. So you may want to keep that in mind as well. I would say it's ideal, it's really ideal if you can make arrangements beforehand to evacuate with your pet to a location that's going to be safe. Certainly there are public, or I would say government-run and supported shelters that are available in an emergency when an emergency is declared, but not all government shelters may take all pets, depending on what kind of pets you have. So there may be some restrictions there sometimes when, depending on the pet you have, may not be a good fit for a government shelter. But certainly they do exist, and the pictures I have there are one of the shelters that was, again, stood up during Hurricane Sandy. It was in an old warehouse, and we were able to, as National Veterinary Response Team, working along with the ASPCA, fashion a shelter in that warehouse. So it certainly can be done. I think you tend to have a bit more, I think it's often a better fit for people if they can be with their pets. It helps the person, it helps the pet in a stressful time, and it allows you to have a bit more interaction with your pet and have, it's just sort of a better situation all the way around if you can plan and you can go to a facility or a friend's house or a place where you can have more connection with your pet. But certainly government shelters exist, and I think there's a real commitment in Virginia to have a focus on pets in disaster and really see pets and people as one holistic preparedness effort and response effort. So I think Virginia has really been a leader in that regard and really embraced that along with our partners such as VDACS, our Virginia State Animal Response Team, and obviously local emergency responders and local emergency coordinators. Now let's talk a little bit about livestock and horses toward the end here. Not everybody has livestock or horses, but certainly many people do, and you need to think about them as well. Now, you may not always evacuate, especially livestock, but certainly horses, a lot of times people can evacuate. It's not, even if you can't evacuate these large animals, sometimes there's a way, especially working within your community, with neighboring properties or with other producers or say for instance equine owners in the area, you can make arrangements for sheltering, especially sheltering in a safer area. For instance, if you have a hurricane or flooding, you might be able to arrange with neighbors working together to get livestock or horses to higher ground. You may also be able to haul them out in a trailer, especially for horses. But certainly we would always want people to have a good record of all livestock on the property and ensure each animal has an identification tag or some type of identification. It's not unusual in emergencies, both with large and small animals, that animals start roaming freely. You know, fences break down, other barriers that typically keep animals on a property are damaged, and those animals begin to roam. And so you want to make sure that any animal that is yours is well identified. This could be, in large animals, it could be a microchip, it could be an ear tag, but in any way you want to try to identify those animals. You certainly want to ensure, just like with companion animals, make sure you have enough food and water to care for animals for an extended period of time. Make sure that the farm property is clearly marked with the proper address. We saw this a lot in Katrina. A lot of infrastructure, as you might imagine, gets destroyed when you have a hurricane or other major event. And so people don't necessarily, if you're trying to get back to your place, or if first responders are trying to come to help with anything on your property is not well marked anymore because that's been destroyed. So if there's a way to mark your property with your address on it in some way, that is helpful as well. And plan animal evacuation routes in advance and practice that, especially if you're hauling larger animals like horses. Plan, have practice sessions where you're trailering your horse, or maybe somebody else is trailering your horse, so that in case you need to turn to neighbors, friends, or first responders to help you with that, your horse or those animals are used to someone else handling them and trailering them. Plan your evacuation routes and practice them, and have multiple, because again, infrastructure is going to be destroyed, roads may be blocked. So if you only have one evacuation route and then that's blocked, things may not go as planned. So having multiple evacuation routes can be very helpful. And then certainly always working with neighboring farmers to coordinate transporting, to coordinate sheltering. If you can safely shelter animals in place and maybe move them to higher ground, for instance, if you're expecting flooding or a hurricane, maybe that's all you need to do. Maybe sometimes you do feel a need, based on your situation with larger animals, to actually trailer them or haul them off the property or physically move them further afield. But again, that all takes time, it's a big effort, and so that's why it's important to be prepared. And speaking of being prepared, in the final slide here, wrapping it up, of how you can help. One is to be prepared. If you have an ability to care for your own animals, to evacuate them so you can have general oversight and control of those animals, it's better for everybody. you're less stressed, the animal is less stressed. Yes, certainly there are shelters, like government shelters that can be used, and I think they do a great job. But it's nothing like being with your pet. And for your pet, there's nothing like being with you from a stress level. And that's better for everybody. Educate others about disaster preparedness. As you start getting your go bag together and thinking about these things, maybe share it with others who also have dogs, cats, horses, etc. Maybe you want to volunteer with a community animal response team. We have a number of them in Virginia. I have them listed there. Or inquire about starting a community animal response team in your area. Community animal response teams are grassroots level responders in an emergency in which some type of organized response is needed. And then they may be activated either on the local or state level, and they respond under the auspices of local emergency management. So that's sort of a thumbnail sketch of what a CART is. There's more information coming up here that you can review via the Virginia State Animal Response Team website. You see that as the second bullet there. I've also included a number of other resources here and the websites. A lot of these sites will have, say, go bag checklists that you can download to help you get started, just preparing materials or what you'll need if you have to go. You may want to contact your local emergency manager or county administrator to see what kind of advice they have or what kind of resources they have in an emergency and what they would suggest. And then there are a number of other groups and agencies, as you see there on the screen, that have some great information about disaster preparedness for animals. I know my time is almost up here. I'm happy to take any questions, or I would love to hear any comments or experiences of folks on the line who have had to evacuate, who have had to consider this, who have helped people do it. So I thank you very much for your